Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Life After Dev. We are just about to hear from Kit Powney, who is going to talk as part of our Dev Innovation Summit on the subject of AI for good or AI for not so good. Let's hear what she has to say.
I think often we're sold that AI is sort of a silver bullet, and you definitely see that sort of from Silicon Valley, and it's going to save the world. But I think when you're coming from a place of a charity where you are seeking to challenge injustice or bring social change, can you use a tool that a lot of the stuff that's in the mass market right now is built on the foundation of sort of concentrated power, bias, data exploitation, environmental impacts, and things we probably don't even know because a lot of it is black boxed. So today, again, I'm not here to talk about AI for good or AI for bad, but what is it like to be working in a charity, not navigating a good tool or an evil tool, but in that grey area, and how do we wrestle with what responsible adoption looks like? So for those of you who don't know, I work at TIFA, and it's an international development charity. We work through sort of partners and local churches in underserved communities in around about 50 countries. If you want to know more, I'd head over to the website. But essentially, we do sort of humanitarian response, community development through local partnership and advocacy and influencing. And my role is essentially to be almost like an in-house tech consultant, asking questions around how can we use all sorts of digital technology, not just AI. But as you can imagine, my role has become quite AI heavy in the last couple of years. So to kick off with, I think you all know AI is all around us, and we're probably using it multiple times a day without consciously choosing to use it. It's been around for a while through sort of like spam filters and your Netflix recommendations, but it is sort of been supercharged in the last couple of years as things like ChatGPT have come onto the mass market. So it's not that AI is coming, and it's not that we can almost choose to not use it. So the question is, how do we use it in light of all that we know around it? And I feel like as a leader in charity, we're often sort of circling this question of the AI boom and the AI doom. There is the silver bullet, the promise of AI. It's going to end world hunger. All the brilliant examples that Loxine was just talking about. Localized, really practical, delivering impact. Solving challenges we're seeing. But then on the bad side as well, we're seeing uncomfortable ethical failures, things that could potentially cause harm as well to people that we're working with. Bias being perpetuated, a lack of transparency that's uncomfortable, and misinformation. And I think it's being able to hold that tension and being able to make decisions. That is something the charity sector is practicing. We're not always getting it right, but there is a lot of conversation around that grey area and what it looks like to hold that tension. And I think something that I've started to think more around is this sort of idea of the invisible architecture that sits in the room when you're thinking about AI and you're looking at an application or a tool, and understanding sort of the weight of the investment globally, but also in the UK. Last year, the government reported that daily there was around 200 million private investment going into the UK AI sector. So that is just, in terms of the impact of that is huge. And we're seeing it embedded across all of our tools and our software and our phones. And, most charities would operate on Google or Microsoft. So the option to not use isn't there because it's just being embedded, whether you're using Adobe to edit photos or just Gmail to send your emails. So it's been weaved into just your way of working as you start even beginning to think about how are we going to use AI and broader technology. And we've already talked about the oligarchy and how power is being concentrated, and that's shaping the future, and even some of the narrative around AI for good. Who's good? Is it a representative good? Most likely not. And I think as well in this year, more than half the world's global population is going to be going to the polls. And if you think about the potential risks around AI being used to create deep fakes and misinformation, and sort of the potential chaos and volatility that could create around elections, I think that's quite scary, especially when you're in sort of the development sector, and elections can be a really challenging time for communities. And then I think thinking more on sort of the bad practice, we're building systems and tools on sort of black box systems where we don't have the transparency, it does have significant environmental impacts, but even being able to pull out what those environmental impacts are incredibly challenging because they're changing all the time. It's infused within wider tech and wider energy uses. But we know that vast energy and water consumption are happening, and that we're seeing, technologies just amplifying challenges, negative stereotypes, inequalities, biases. And when you take all of that, when you start to think about what's a potential option for my charity to use AI, how do you start to make those decisions into the space of AI for good? And is it actually, this is the least worst way we could use it? So I think all of that can feel very sort of over there in the distance, sort of billionaires drinking Mai Tais in data centers, and it's not really relevant to us. But where you do start to see that seeping in, you've probably seen a lot of this because it broke into the news late last year. But, we're already seeing that stereotype, that invisible architecture come into sort of our everyday realities and cause harm and just sort of perpetuate those negative stereotypes. So when Gemini 3 was launched and Nano Banana was updated, we saw a flood of these just awful photos coming back through, and things that the charity sector and the development sector have done a lot of work on, trying to think of what is ethical storytelling, what is empowering storytelling, what does it look like to truly get consent for someone's story, what does it look like to partner with someone, what does it look like to try and infuse like empowerment in how you represent someone, that they would be able to see whatever content you've created and say, yes, that's me, I feel proud of seeing that, rather than it being something sort of manipulative and exploitive. So we're just seeing that coming back out, and that's just sort of one example of where that sort of invisible architecture does come into sort of the public space and causes harm. But what can we do? We can't, like Loxane said, we can't just run and hide. I think as AI becomes increasingly integrated into our daily lives, it's crucial to make sure that AI really reflects who we are, whether that's as an individual or in an organization, and drawing boundaries around what you will and what you won't do. And I think coming back to that as well, because the speed and the pace that AI is developing at, those lines are going to change, but your values shouldn't. And so it's how your values apply in that new context. And I think essentially keeping people at the center, so asking questions, rather than is this a good or a bad use of AI? Does it reflect our values? Rather than can it be done? I think should it be done? I think that's a really big question a lot of companies should be asking more. And rather, then does it work? Like, does it build trust? Is it gonna help serve the communities we're working with? Is it going to solve that problem? Is it going to help that particular issue that we're working on? They're helpful questions that you can bring into when you are looking at potential adoptions. But I am going to run through a couple of AI for good examples. Some of them you might have seen. So one, this is Impress Yield, which is in Mali. So in Mali, cotton farming is a really important source of livelihood. It contributes to about 15% of the country's economy, and therefore it supports a huge amount of livelihood, around about 4 million people. But over the years, as climate change has continued to progress, it poses a really serious threat to cotton farming. It's harder for farmers to follow the traditional seasonal patterns that they would have had been following, because the weather is just changing so much and really negatively impacting the size of the crops yielded. And I think over the last few years, there's been lots of support for this and lots of different things, sort of SMS texting as soon as information's come in. But this is sort of a further leap forward, this AI solution that Impress Yield worked on. And there's a link if you want to have a look, more information. But they essentially took sort of satellite imagery and AI sort of predictions in order to give farmers local sort of yield forecasts, and showing them a map that helped them make choices to manage their crops and deal with the challenges of the changing weather and the erratic weather. But then they saw an increase in the amount of crops that were yielded. So that, again, is like a really practical example. It's one country, but I think a really brilliant example of being able to use AI and the data that's available out there to actually support and help local communities. The next one I'm going to share is actually a little bit old, but I think it's a really good example. And also, I know that they've been working quite a lot on this. So in 2023, when the Turkey and Syria earthquakes hit, Direct Relief, who are an American charity and they do quite a lot around mapping as well, actually. One of the things, the challenges that they were having is that after earthquakes, due to just the chaos of being in an emergency and after an earthquake, they were finding it took a long time to figure out how many health facilities were damaged, especially sort of the lower level ones. So not like a major hospital, that was quite quick to find out, but if it was sort of a pharmacy or like a dialysis clinic or something like that, and normally it would take them quite a long time to do that. But what they did is their staff and then some people from Stanford used AI models with sort of satellite imagery up to date to sort of map across and estimate the structural damage to the health infrastructure. And that meant they were able to actually start deploying support within hours rather than a few days, which is what it would have normally taken. So they could identify gaps where the population just didn't have any medical access and be able to send out emergency response without those sort of ground surveys that would take a long time. They were honest. There was sort of not full consistency across models, and sometimes the potential location of the facility wasn't actually right, and there was sort of inconsistency across damage, but that's sort of what they've been working on over the last few years. But even with that, it still helped them respond much more quicker than they would have using this sort of AI model. And the final one that I'm just going to share, which is one of my favorites, because I think it's just really clever, and you've probably already read about it, but the rainforest connection. So the challenge that they were facing was like lots of illegal logging and poaching happening in really remote parts of the rainforest where it's just not practical for a human to be there to monitor. So that means by the time they're aware of it, the damage is done and it's too late. So what I love is they use solar powered devices as well. So they're like cutting their footprint within even their tool. Absolutely brilliant. But they placed them across sort of the forest canopy, and it had been, the context that they'd given it was training on sounds like what do chainsaws and trucks and gunshots. And if the sort of solar power devices picked that up, it was immediately sent to the local rangers. And that enabled them to respond immediately, whether it was them or sort of local community, whilst the illegal activity was still happening. And I think, again, that's just a really brilliant use of AI. And again, like Loxane, it's actually really small. It's to a very specific problem. And one of the things I often talk about when I'm talking with people about AI ideas is let's not get pulled into the cell of let's scale it, which is very much Silicon Valley, digital transformation, let's make it bigger, better. Whereas actually when you do that, you often dilute what you're working on, and it's not going to be as valuable to the individuals you're working on. So if it can scale, great, but that shouldn't be a driver, because it can really negatively impact what you're trying to do. I think as well, we're probably going to touch on that on our talk coming, so I might whiz through these. But there are also examples where charities, we've had good intentions and we've got it wrong. So you've probably all seen these two images and examples. And I want to share them because I think they're two sides of the same coin. So it's using AI generated imagery but very different ways of deploying it. So Amnesty International, they wanted to protect their activists. So they created an AI generated image and to talk about basically the situation. Sorry, they created an AI image because they wanted to protect their activists, and they wanted to talk about sort of activist rights and brutality around that. But what they didn't do is they didn't publish and say this is an AI generated image. They just put it out there, so then people reacted and felt you might be trying to protect them, but it's manipulative, and you might get gain from it, whether that's donations or people taking more action. So that sort of trust and transparency piece there was really critical. And in the end, Amnesty International removed it. And then on the other side of the coin, you've got Furniture Bank, Canadian charity. They actually sort of were really open that they were using AI generated images, and almost celebrating that by using it, they saved like $60,000 instead of a campaign taking them 3 months or 6 months to create. It took them 2 weeks. They also then weren't asking the people that they're working with, can you please go and sit on the floor there with your kid and look sad? So they were protecting and respecting the dignity of the people they were working with. And it did still get a backlash, but I think because they had just been really open with it and given their logic behind it, the backlash wasn't as large. Amnesty is obviously a much larger charity too. Another one as well that I want to talk about that you've probably seen as well is Plan International, and I think this really plays into the idea of AI for not so bad, which is so they used, you can see they generated an image for one of their campaigns against child marriage, and they did that because they wanted to protect the real girls from their stories from sort of retaliation and harm. So they were choosing to avoid harm, but through doing that, it did introduce sort of misrepresentation, perpetuate some negative stereotypes. But what I think is really interesting about this is like AI ethics in practice, because I wasn't involved in any of the conversations, I don't work there, but I can imagine the conversation in the room. Like, do we create an illustration? Do we not create an image? What do we do? Like, how are they going to still use sort of marketing practice to get people to engage, to get people to care, to get people to give, to get people to sign, whether it's the MP action to tip and shift the scale. But through doing it, they created another problem. So, you know, did they choose which harm they were going to minimize? Were they going to choose the risk of misrepresentation versus the risk of exposure and retaliation, which would cause real world sort of harm to potentially a child? So I'm not sure what the conversation was, but I think it's a really good example. And it's not perfect, but I think you can see the logic in how they got there. So I've talked you through sort of the big picture AI, some examples of good, some examples of, oh, this is a little bit more grey, a little bit more AI for not so bad. And now I'm going to speed through just a couple of things that as you go and you look into workplaces and moving on, things that might be helpful tools or thoughts for you to take into conversations to help wherever you're working responsibly adopt AI. So one, I think putting AI in its proper place, and I think this for all technology. Technology must serve people in the charity, not the other way around. And I think all of our role is to set the tone in how we and where we place AI and technology. So it's really easy to get distracted by other charities doing exciting things, but should you be doing that? Is that going to help you? I often talk about organizations as a car, and you're traveling towards your charitable purpose, and you know, technology or AI can be your super fuel, but you need to make sure it's the right fuel that you're putting in, not just copying something. So it should enable people and organizations to achieve the purpose and never become the purpose itself. A question we ask is, you know, does this protect the dignity of the people we serve, or is it just making our jobs easier? You know, in my role, it would be very easy to make everyone at Tiffin like a super Google user and like really high individual productivity and team productivity through using all the different things across the Google workspace. But I work at Tiffin because I care about ending poverty. So I want to ensure that whilst those things are helpful and good and can free up capacity, I want to ensure that we are looking at our global programmatic work, and any use of technology we put in there is going to be something that actually helps and supports people. And then these are the three questions that we often sort of frame any use of an application of AI. So one, does this help us achieve our goals strategically? Two, does it align with our values? And I think it's helpful for organizations or individuals to sort of map out what are your values. So then when you're coming to a use of AI, it's not, again, something over here. You've got a really practical thing to check it against, and what could it look like in different situations? And again, human-centered, where is it essential you keep human interactions in the loop, and where can you partner with AI? And often I think in conversations there are areas that are low risk, and actually having more AI in that space is okay. But as soon as it starts to medium to high risk, that's where you really need to be clear about what level of human oversight do you have, what is the level of risk, and how can you mitigate against it. But I want to finish on an exciting note, which is social change. History is full of people co-opting tools, messages, channels, all sorts of things for good. And we have always flipped the script. So whereas previously technology and channels may have controlled the message, it's always been reclaimed, hacked, reimagined, and turned into a megaphone for change. And I think AI is no different. There are challenges that we really need to pay attention to, and not just sort of greenwash, as it were, but genuinely think, how are you mitigating this? What could the harm be caused from using this? But I think the bigger risk is if we do just shy away from it because it's too much, it's overwhelming, because we're people that care about justice, dignity, and truth, and we need to come into the space of AI and show what a good use of it is, a use that does help change the world. Thank you. I would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your reflections.